you should know way more about the guest than the listeners think you do. It's your job to bring out value. Podcast Growth Nation, welcome back to another very special episode of Podcast Growth University, where we are all about podcasts all the time. I hope you enjoyed the latest episode number 5. Should you be doing solo episodes and guest interviews? So we talked a little bit about the difference between solo episodes, guest interviews, and the intentions behind doing each of those. Today, for episode number 6, how to become a better interviewer. Being a good interviewer is way more important than people realize, because there are a lot of opportunities that may come your way based on your interview skills. So for those who are new and are not aware of the other podcast I have, or maybe you're not yet sick of me talking about it, we have another podcast. I have a business partner and a co-host, Alan, called Next Level University. And one time we had an interview with a man named Evan Carmichael. So Evan Carmichael in our space, in the self-improvement industry, is one of the top. I think he's got 3.5 million subscribers on YouTube. Many books he's written. He's spoken on stage with Tony Robbins and some of the most successful humans in the world. So we got this opportunity to interview him. And he was doing what was kind of like a press tour for his new book. And we were told that we would have 20 minutes with Evan. It was going to be virtual on FaceTime audio. This was before people were really using Zoom that much. And we said, okay, so we're going to get 20 minutes. Let's make this the best 20-minute interview possible. So Evan logs on. We start the conversation. We get right into it. I do the intro, and we get rolling into questions. And we were right around probably the 17 to 18-minute mark. And I said, all right, Evan, we want to respect your time, and I want to give you an opportunity to talk about what you have going on in the world right now. Tell us about your new book. And that's something we'll get into as well, making sure you give your guests the time to promote what they have going on. But he said, no, I want to keep rolling. You guys are really good. I want to keep going. So what started as a 20-minute podcast interview opportunity ended up being an hour. So 20 minutes ended up becoming an hour. Now, a couple of things could have happened. One, he could have said, hey, let's just keep going, and we could have ran out of questions, and it wouldn't have been very good. Or we could have over-prepped like we did, and when we got the opportunity, we were able to over-deliver with our quality. So, and there's another story too. Let me give you this other one. So we had a mentor for a time. David Meltzer was his name. We met Dave at an event that he was speaking at, and then he ended up coaching Alan before Alan and I were really business partners, and then he ended up coaching both of us. When he was coaching us, he would coach us live on his podcast. Because we asked really good questions, he would literally take our coaching call and then replay it as a podcast episode, and he has one of the biggest business shows in the world. So we would get a lot of exposure. People would come check out our podcast, and if they liked us, they would stick around. The reason is because we were really good at asking questions, and I like to think that we're really good interviewers. Obviously, there's always room for improvement, and we do far less interviewing now than we ever have because we're doing way more solo episodes. But depending on where you are in your journey, interviewing will be important, and honing the skills of interviewing is always going to be valuable. So I have 5 or 6 points today I want to walk through. And I believe that one of the benefits for me is I've been on a lot of podcasts lately. So yes, we've recorded 1,050 episodes, but I've been on probably 300 other shows at this point, and there are some things that jump off the page to me when I get done an interview. Either this person was really good at this, really good at this, it was, a really strong interview, or this was, I won't say a waste of my time, but this was something that I would not do again. That's kind of how I qualify interviews. 1, I would do it again. 2, I wouldn't do it again. And there are some pretty common similarities amongst the ones that I would do again, and then also on the other end, the shows that I wouldn't do. So these are the 5 or 6 things that I came up with. All right, number 1 is simple. You got to know how to pronounce your guest's name. I know it probably sounds simple and it probably sounds like, how could that ever get messed up? My last name is Palmieri. In the last week, I have been called Palmerini, Palmieri, like many, many different things. Now, I understand that when you're nervous and you're introing somebody, you might mess up their name. I've done that before for sure. But it wasn't because I didn't know the person's name. I just got nervous in the moment. So those are two different things. But the reason I say this is because I cannot tell you how many times I've been on an interview and somebody says, today we're chatting with Kevin, and they'll just throw a name out there and they'll say this live on the air. I hope I said your name right. Not a good look. Not a good look. Not a good look from your listeners, and not a good look from your guest either. So number one, I know it's simple. I know it's a simple fundamental. Make sure you pronounce the person's name correctly. Really think about this. Your name is the only thing you really take throughout your entire life with yourself. Really, when you're born, you are given a name and you have that name, unless you change it, for the majority of your life. People take their names very seriously. It's a very personal thing, so you got to get the name right. The worst thing in the world you can do is break rapport right off the bat by pronouncing somebody's name wrong. And they're going to know. They're going to say, well, you didn't do your research, and this probably isn't going to be a very good interview. So that's number one, a simple one to get right. A good hack, if they have a podcast, listen to their podcast. They usually introduce themselves that way. If they do a lot of other podcasts, look up other podcasts, because you can kind of get an idea of how other people pronounce their name and if it sounds right. If they've done any news segments or media segments, look it up that way. There's a lot of ways you can do it. YouTube. So that's the number one point. All right. Number two, do as much research as possible. So what I mean by this is, there have been shows that I have gone on where they say, I don't know what you do. I don't look up any of your stuff. I just want this to be a conversation. I appreciate that. I do appreciate that. But you have to understand, at the end of the day, if you're not doing any research, you're purely relying on your interview skills. And if you haven't been practicing interviewing, it's probably not going to be a great episode. The importance of research around your guest is, you know things about them that you can tap into. So we had somebody on our podcast probably maybe 3 years ago. His name is Brandon Farbstein, and he was born with some sort of genetic, I don't know exactly what it is. It's some sort of genetic thing where he only grew to, I believe, 3'9". So he's 3'9", and he has trouble walking, and he has a lot of physical limitations because of the way that his genetics are. It's the best way to explain it. I don't know what the technical term or the medical term for what he has is, but we had him on the podcast, and he's a great human being. We got the opportunity to meet him at an event as well. And I did so much research when we talked to Brandon, and my goal was to be able to get him to open up about things that I thought would add value to the audience. That was my ultimate goal. So my thought around interviewing is, you should know way more than you let on. For me, and for us, the way we've set up our interviews, the interviews aren't necessarily for me to learn. They're for me to add value to our community. So I did a lot of research on Brandon. One of the things I found out was he was bullied so severely in either middle school or high school that he went into his closet and he contemplated suicide. And that's not something that he talks about often, but I knew it's something that he would talk about because his goal is to help other people. His goal is to inspire either children or young adults or anybody who has adversity that they're dealing with. So I said, Brandon, in my research, I saw that there was one point in your life where you really had a rock bottom moment where you thought about taking your life. Can you walk us through that and explain what that was like for you? And that was probably the most valuable part of that entire interview, but it never would have happened if I didn't do the research. So my frame is always, you should know way more about the guest than the listeners think you do. It's your job to bring out value. So in the beginning, I was doing 2 hours of prep work for a 1-hour interview. That was kind of my flow. So if we had a 1-hour interview, I would sit down and do 2 hours of research. I would listen to other interviews. I would look at their website. One thing I love doing is looking at their social media, whatever it may be. So make sure you do your research. And you can always have a bunch of questions written out, but the ultimate goal and the ultimate idea, and this is the analogy I use, the example, is you want to find the string and you want to pull it. So what I find with a lot of people is you'll go on their show and they'll have 10 questions that they ask every single guest, and they just hammer through the question. So where were you born? I was born here. What was your school like? This is what my school was like. What is the biggest lesson you've learned over the last X amount of years? Boom, 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 down the line, where it's not conversational and it seems very impersonal. It seems very impersonal. So when I say find the string and pull it, ultimately that means I'm trying to find a piece of value and then I'm trying to create a conversation based on that. So one of the parts of my stories or my story is that I was raised without a father, right? So when I say that on a podcast episode, a lot of times people will say, okay, that's the string. Let me pull that. How do you think growing up without a father affected you later in life? Okay, cool. That's a story. Did you ever meet your dad? I know you said you grew up without your dad, but did you ever meet him later in life? Cool. What's an important lesson for the listeners that you learned from not having your dad around that you could share with other people? So that one point in my story, if you pull that string, we can go down an entire different road. And there's a bunch of different points that come off of that where a lot of people might just skip that completely and then just go on to their next question, even though it's not necessarily super appropriate for where we are in the interview. And when I say appropriate, I mean relevant. It's not relevant to what we're talking about. So find the string and pull it. That is the best analogy I have, or the best example I have. And that's always the frame for me. Find the string and then pull it. And then when you run out of thread on that string, you find another string and you pull it. I think that is the key to being a good interviewer. Interviewing is an art. It's much different than speaking. Interviewing is you being an active listener while also understanding where you are in terms of value that you're adding to your audience. So find the string and pull it. That is one of my favorite things to say. And I'm sure you'll probably hear me say that many times throughout this podcast. Okay, I just talked about active listening. One of the other common things that I see is somebody will ask a question and you will give an answer. Well, I'll flip it around because in this scenario, you're asking the question. So you will ask a question, your guest will give you an answer, and instead of either holding space or pulling the string, this is what happens. We insert a filler word or several filler words. My favorite filler word back in the day was, I love that. So somebody would say, this is the lesson, blah, blah, blah. This is my story. And I would say, oh, I love that. Next question. That is not how conversations work. Now, you can say that one time. You can say, oh, I really love that. Then go to your next point. But what that is that is a lot of times somebody not having the confidence to either hold space or actually pull the string, or they weren't active listening, so they don't know what to say next. So they're just trying to buy time. And again, mine used to be, I love that. So I completely understand. I have been in that situation many, many times. But all you're doing is you're kind of breaking the flow. So it's like a start, value, story, done. Start, value, story, done. When you insert filler words like that, all you're doing is buying yourself a little extra time.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Hurvitz. So last year I wanted to quit everything. I wanted to throw in the towel. I wanted to hang up my microphone. And Kevin said no. Kevin said, keep going, Jen. You've got this. And oh my God, I'm going to cry. And I did. Coaches need coaches, y'all. And working with Kevin has been one of the best experiences of my life. Oh my God, I'm crying. Kevin, you are the best. I could not do this without you. And thank you. Thank you for being you and the amazing human that you are.
So when somebody says something that you're impacted by or you're inspired by, repeat the part that actually stood out for you. So when you say, I love that, you're kind of just saying, I don't know what to say here. I'm just going to throw these words out. Where you could say, that's really interesting that blank, 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 blank. How did that affect you later? Right? That's all it is. It's just, and again, I know becoming an active listener is a challenge, so that's going to take time. But when you're throwing these filler words out, you're basically saying, I don't have anything to say. Let me just buy some time and transition to something else. So this is in alignment with find the string and pull it. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. Active listening and skip the bookends. I love that. That's so awesome. That kind of stuff. Because that kind of cuts off the conversation. Let's see what else. Oh, this is such an important one. Okay. Be on time on both ends. So not only should you be in the room, say you're using Zoom or StreamYard or Riverside, whatever you're using, Zencaster, be in the room a couple minutes early and make sure you have your guest off at the agreed upon time. So one of the things that we did really well is we were always early in the room when we had guests, and we were never late letting guests off. Because many of our guests were doing back-to-back-to-back-to-back episodes, we had to make sure that they were off at the right time. And that's something I took very, very seriously. So we would set a timer and we would make sure we set it up where they would have 5 minutes at the end to plug everything they have going on, and then they would be off. So make sure you're in the room or on the link or whatever it is, calling the person, whatever media you're using, whatever medium you're using to do this interview. Make sure you're there early and make sure you are letting them off at the agreed upon time. There's no better way to break rapport than to be late or have somebody late to their next meeting because you went over. Another part to that is try to send over as much information as you can. So we have what we call a pre-flight checklist, and a pre-flight checklist, all it says is, this is the app that we use. Please make sure you have strong Wi-Fi. Please make sure you have an external microphone. The interview will be X amount of minutes long, blah, blah, blah. All it really is, it's giving extra clarity, especially if you're interviewing people who haven't been on a lot of interviews. Having that extra level of clarity and certainty will definitely help them. But this is my rule. So again, on the other side, as a podcast guest, I log into a meeting. And on Zoom, sometimes it'll say the host has another meeting in progress, or it'll say, please wait for the host to start this meeting. I wait 5 minutes, and if nobody shows up, I go to my next thing. Now, you might say, Kev, that's kind of a jerk move, or you might say, why do you do that? I don't think that's fair. This is why I do it. Because over the hundreds of interviews I've been on, the one theme has always been this. If somebody is 3 minutes late, they're probably not coming. That's what I've seen. Very much. I had a podcast breakthrough session today that I was supposed to do with somebody. I waited 5 minutes in. They didn't show up. I sent them an email. I'm willing to bet that they will email me back and say, I completely forgot. That is my guess, because that's what I've seen most often. So on the other end, as somebody who's being interviewed, if you're late, we're already off to a bad start, especially if we have a half-hour interview, right? We just went from 30 minutes to 25 minutes, and that's a giant portion of time for a half-hour interview. So if you want to make a good impression, especially a good first impression, you got to be on time. So make sure you're on time, make sure you're ready, and make sure you have your person that's on as a guest off at the right time, because people have other stuff to do. And again, I understand things run long and you can be in the depths of a conversation, but as a professional, it is your job to make sure that the interview goes the way that it is agreed upon. And that can be heavy and it can be a challenge, but I will tell you that people appreciate it. One of my favorite things is when I get on an interview and I say to the host, hey, I have a hard stop at blank time. I'm on another podcast right after this. And they'll get off 10 minutes early and say, hey, I wanted to give you a couple extra minutes to prep for your next interview. Awesome. I appreciate that very much. Those are the interviews I remember. Whatever number this is. I don't know what number it is. I think it's like 6 maybe. The last point I have is be a professional. So this goes into a lot of different things, but I was supposed to be on a show the other day, And this person emailed me, and I was in the waiting room. I was in the Zoom waiting room. It said, please wait. This host has another meeting in progress. And I said, no worries. I'm sure they're probably just running a minute over, whatever. They emailed me and said, hey, are you coming? And I said, yep, I'm actually in the Zoom room right now. I'm ready to go, with a smiley face. And I got nothing back. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait 5 minutes. And I waited my 5 minutes, and I think I actually waited 8 minutes because I had made contact with the person. I waited 8 minutes. I screenshotted the screen that I had that said, please wait. The host has another meeting in progress. And I emailed it to them and said, hey, I was in the waiting room for 8 minutes. I didn't think you were coming, so we're going to have to reschedule. And it's very interesting because this person said to me, oh, I was in the waiting room for 8 minutes too, and then I ended up leaving. And it's like, well, I don't feel like that's the most professional answer, because either something went wrong, I was in the wrong room, even though it said my name, or you weren't in the room and something happened. I don't know what happened, but I will tell you that sometimes people say, that is totally on me. I completely messed up. My calendar got double booked. I completely forgot about it. And then there's other times where people say, no, that's you, not me. Fair. Maybe it was me. I don't think it was, but maybe it was. But I just think that being a professional means you're taking ownership when it's necessary. That I always say, if I show up to a meeting late, I always apologize. That's on me. I shouldn't have been late. I value being on time at a very, very high level. That's on me. I completely apologize. My bad for wasting a couple minutes of your time. I try to take extreme ownership. If you're interviewing somebody, you got to do the same thing. You got to do the same thing. Because again, you're building a relationship with this person. It depends to what degree the relationship goes, and it depends on how good of an interview you are as well. But that's an important thing. Throughout everything I talk about, you want to be a professional. You want to treat your podcast like a business. Would this person leave you a positive review? Yes or no? That's a good way to put it. Last thing I'll add on this, and I was not planning on this, but this actually happened to me yesterday. Don't try to sell people after you interview them. Don't try to do that. What do I mean by that? I was on a show yesterday, and this person has some sort of online video platform for courses. And this person said, oh, you have a pretty successful podcast? And I said, yeah, it's successful. We have an awesome community. And this person said, oh, that's awesome. We actually have this blank, 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 blank. That might be something you're interested in. Do you want me to tell you more about it? And I was like, no, I'm all set. I appreciate that, but we're doing our own thing and we're not interested in collaborating right now. It leaves a little bit of a sour taste in your mouth, honestly, because it seems like, oh, you didn't really interview me to interview me. You interviewed me to sell me on something. And again, especially at the end of a not so positive experience, this person didn't know my name. They didn't know anything about our podcast. They didn't know anything about our business. They didn't know anything about me. Nothing. And at the end, they tried to sell me. So this is something I would not do again. I wouldn't leave a positive review. I would not suggest my business partner goes on that show. I don't believe it's worth his time, right? You have to be thinking that way. At the end of the day, it's a relationship. You're doing, and it really depends on who the guest is, but you're doing the guest a favor by having them on. They're doing you a favor by being on your show. If they're more quote unquote successful than you and they're going to bring eyes to your show, then they're doing you a bigger favor. If they're somebody who you believe in and you have a big show and you're giving them a platform, then that's you giving them an opportunity, right? And that's great. But you have to understand that this is a relationship and it is your duty and your responsibility to make sure that you're doing it correctly. Either person has an opportunity and you want to make sure that you're creating the best opportunity for your listeners, for your guest, and for yourself. And I think that this is something that just has to be practiced. It has to be practiced. You want to make sure that you're giving a positive opportunity and a positive experience for this guest, because you never know who this guest knows. They might know a lot of different people, or they might come back later. That's another thing is when you're a good interviewer, you can reach back out to people, 6 months, a year down the road, and they might come back on your show because they enjoyed the first interview. I've had many people at the end of our first interview say, hey, would you come back in the future? And if it's a show I like and a show I believe in, yes, I say absolutely, 100%. I would love to be back. But it's based on the fact that they're good interviewers. And what you lack in skill, you can always make up for in personality. I'll say that too. I was on a show recently where this person wasn't necessarily a strong interviewer, but they had a great personality, they had great energy, and it was very clear that they cared about what they were doing. And it turned into a very, very good conversation. So these are a couple, I guess, several things I would suggest when it comes to being a good interviewer. Another little tip is practice interviewing in public. So when you're in line at the grocery store, start a conversation with the person who's doing the checkout. That kind of stuff goes a long way. When you're in line somewhere, start a conversation and just ask people questions. There's a good framework. I think it's Ford, Ford. And like the thought behind this is you never run out of stuff to talk about. I don't know if I believe that necessarily, but Ford, family. So family is F, occupation is O, recreation is R, and then dreams is D. So tell me about your family. What do you do for work? And then again, you can pull the string on all these. What do you do for fun? And what is it that you've always wanted to do? Like, what does your dream life look like? And then you can pull the string on all those. So I would start practicing that in public. When you're in the supermarket line, when you're at the pizza shop, when you're out to dinner with the waiter or the waitress or whatever, it's a good opportunity for you to start practicing your conversation skills, and they will cross over to the podcast. I think that is it. Let me see. Yes, I think that is it. Podcast Growth University, as always, if you are interested in a free 30-minute call with me, totally free. I'm not going to sell you on anything. I will walk you through what we've done, and I can try to raise your awareness to where you are in your podcast journey and where the next step for you is. I will put my link, I will put my link in the show notes, and you can book a time that works for you. I'm not going to try to sell you on anything. My ultimate goal is to add as much value as possible. And if you are a podcaster who is thinking to yourself, look, I don't know if I have time to do the audio editing, the video editing. I don't even know how to video edit. I don't know how to audio edit. Please reach out to us at any time. We have a wonderful, wonderful team at Next Level Podcast Solutions where we do everything from full show production, where we do all the audio editing, the video editing, we post it to YouTube, we make teaser clips, we do the show notes, all the way down to coaching with me, where we hop on the phone every other week and we just talk about your business, we talk about the podcast, we talk about your listeners, your messaging, your speaking, whatever it may be. So I will have the link in the show notes for all of that stuff. Our next episode is going to be, episode number 7 is going to be building your podcast family. So the sign off that I have at Next Level University, our other show, my other show, is we don't have fans, we have family. I'm not saying that because it sounds good. I'm saying that because over the last 5.5 years, we have built a tight-knit family based on our core beliefs and our core values as a podcast. So that is what we will talk about in the next episode. If you're going to put your time and energy anywhere other than being in front of the microphone and then promoting on social media, the other best place is to be having conversations with your community. It is so valuable. It goes such a far way. So that is what we will be talking about in episode 7. As always, thank you all for tuning in and keep on podcasting. I will talk to you next week.